If something behind you says your name, like it knows the shape of your fear, do not turn around. I remember the house before it remembered me. It was the kind of place that smelled of old tea and rain-damp wood, where the light from the street came in thin and tired through curtains the color of bruises. I moved in because the rent was low and because silence had begun to feel like a pressure against my ears. I thought an empty room would be a sanctuary. I was wrong. The first night, it felt only like the house settling, tiny creaks, a sighing in the pipes. But small sounds have teeth when you are already listening for something to break. I worked nights then, editing video, headphones clamped over my temples like a fragile crown. By 2 in the morning, the living room would condense into shadows, the sofa a darker slope, the bookshelf a line of teeth. The first strange thing was a smell, rotten paper and something metallic, like a coin left too long in an open wound, that came drifting through the vents at odd hours, vanishing before I could trace it. At first, I blamed the building, a neighbor's trash, a plumbing leak. I blamed anxiety and bad coffee. But blame is a lazy kind of armor. Small objects started to move. Not dramatic, not the cinematic flinging of chairs, more insidious. My mug would be half an inch closer to the edge of the table in the morning. A pair of keys that I knew I had set on the shelf would be lying on the floor, face down. Once, a single page torn from a notebook appeared on the hallway landing. A child's spiral of ink, a doodle of an eye, its pupils shaded thick and ragged. I told myself someone was playing a joke. I told friends. They smiled, made jokes about house spirits and rent too cheap to be honest. Their laughter sealed the truth away like a lid. The nights grew longer. Sounds wore new shapes. There was a soft, slow breathing that seemed to come from the rooms behind my bedroom wall, measured and patient as if time itself had learned to inhale. Sometimes I would wake with the sensation of someone lying beside me, a weightless heat at the small of my back, the faint scent of the paper and iron smell curling into my hair. When I flicked the light on, the bed would be empty and the sheets unruffled. The clock would tick like a held breath. My phone recorded nothing. My recordings became empty rooms with the residue of sound, an after image of a footstep, a smear of static where a voice should be. The worst part was how the house watched me learn its language. It was not only things moving, it was the way small, specific memories unstitched themselves. I would open a drawer and find a photograph I did not own, of a field at dusk, people in the distance, their faces blurred into the sky. Or I would find a mirror I didn't remember buying, placed exactly where I never would have put it, reflecting the hallway behind me with a depth that felt wrong. The reflection was always a rhythm slower than life, like an echo of someone breathing out, an echo that stayed when the original breath had left. The first time I felt, with absolute certainty, that something was standing in the doorway behind me, I told myself the sensible things: cat, shadow, electricity. Then the whisper came, my name, so close it vibrated the loose fillings in my teeth. After the whisper, my name, blended with the clock's tick, I stopped pretending I could reason the house away. I became deliberate. I set a camera by the bed, another in the hallway, my phone propped like a fragile witness. I slept with lights on until dawn bled through the curtains and the shape of the room felt less treacherous. For a while, that felt like an answer, documentation, proof. Proof would make it real and therefore manageable. That certainty was naive. The footage was corrupted in the same way memory was. Files would end 3 minutes in with an empty hallway and the faint sound of a hinge sighing, or they would render as static that smelled of iron when I replayed it on my phone. Once, the camera captured a slow, rippling darkness pooling at the foot of my bed, the kind of shadow that absorbs the light rather than simply blocking it. The timestamp read 0333. When I sat up and looked, the room was whole, my blankets folded as if I'd never moved. The recordings kept one honest thing, a voice layered under everything else, my voice, but the cadence was wrong. Elongated vowels as if someone had unstitched my speech and rethreaded it with patience. On playback it said, so plainly it felt like a bruise, don't turn. Friends stopped coming. At first it was scheduling, then fatigue, then an instinctive reluctance I could not name when I called to invite them over. I caught half-heard apologies in their tones, the way people distance themselves from a splintering memory. Once, when I finally convinced someone to stop by, she left after 10 minutes with her face pale and hands trembling, refusing to explain why. She told me later that she had seen, in the hallway mirror, not 2 of us, but 3 faces behind me, pale and empty-eyed, and that one had smiled at her with jaws too wide for a human mouth. I wanted to be angry at her for leaving, or at myself for letting her see what I had learned to avoid, but the anger dissolved into a raw, hollow panic. The phenomena grew less shy about taking form. I woke with the taste of pennies and old pages in my mouth, the back of my throat raw as if I'd swallowed ash. There were depressions on the arm of the sofa where a hand had been resting when no hand should have been there. At night, in the kitchen light, I watched my own reflection blink out of time, my eyes lagging half a beat behind my movements like a scratched film. Once on the bathroom mirror, someone had written from the inside of the glass in letters shaky and small, "Remember when you looked." The letters smeared as if breathed on. My handwriting. I didn't remember writing it. Fear sharpened into something personal. The house learned the cadence of my thoughts and punctuated them with images. Childhood photographs misplaced, names I couldn't quite pronounce in dreams, the echo of laughter that wasn't mine. And always, beneath it all, a pressure at the base of my skull. A sense that something patient and close had taken to standing behind me while I moved through rooms, cataloging the exact angle at which my neck would have to bend to see it. Once, audacious and stupid, I tried to corner it. I turned with the fluorescent bulb clutched in my hand and faced an empty corner. For a fraction of a second I saw, in the gloom, 3 pale shapes line up like figures at the back of a theater. They had no eyes, only pits that drank the light, and they looked, without moving, as if they had just finished laughing. I remember the sound of my own breath, ridiculous and loud. The next morning, a page lay on the kitchen table in exact block letters. Don't look back. The night stopped being a sequence and became a loop with a pulse. Wake, listen, wait, brace. I stopped setting cameras. Watching myself on playback felt like spying on someone else. Instead, I learned the small evasions, the way to cross a room without the floorboard at the foot of the stairs singing, the exact angle of light that didn't throw a long shadow into the doorway. For a while, those tricks were my religion. Rituals keep the dark predictable, and predictability is the only kind of safety the house ever offered. One week, the pressure at the back of my head turned into a presence that reached for me with the patience of seasons. It started by rearranging memories in the daytime. I would forget a name, then find the name written in the margin of a book behind the radiator. I would remember a face incorrectly until the wrong face felt correct. My phone, that small, stubborn island of rationality, began to distort the photos I took. The brightness would shift, faces in the background, growing slightly longer each time I scrolled. Once, in a picture of the living room, there were 4 figures standing behind the couch. Only 3 had been there when I took it. I resolved to leave. I packed quickly, all the way down to the toothbrush, listening for the sound that would tell me the house knew. The hallway seemed longer than it had the day I moved in. The front door was a shape at the end of a corridor that breathed. As I moved, the air around me congealed into that metallic paper smell, thick enough to taste. When I put my hand on the knob, it was colder than anyone could be without being dead. I told myself the sensible things. Keys, locks, taxis, but sense is fragile around terror. Something tapped the shoe of my foot. Not hard, a soft, patient knock, the way a finger tests a sleeper's eyelid. I froze. The pressure behind my ribs turned into a finger tracing the spine of my shirt. I turned, not to look, but to check the angle, an absurd, tiny habit, and my shoulder brushed air. I could hear breathing that was not mine layered under my own, a twin track of inhales. The house had always preferred to do things close to the skin. I managed 3 steps before the mirror in the entryway caught me. It is funny how a mirror can hold a small cemetery of seconds. For a moment there was my face, pale and exhausted, pupils blown wide. Then the image lagged, my mouth opening a heartbeat later than my jaw, and another detail resolved in the glass. Behind my reflection, 2 pale figures stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces like peeled moons. One of them leaned forward and pressed its forehead to my mirrored hair, as if listening for a rhythm. I could see my own reflection blink after them, obeying some slow, borrowed cadence. I wanted to speak. My voice was a curtain pulled by invisible hands. I wanted to run, but my legs had the dry resistance of old hinges. The smaller, nearer face in the mirror turned its head just enough for the light to catch the line of its teeth, and then it smiled with my mouth. The house learned the precise geometry of my fear and arranged it as a room where I no longer owned the last movement. I don't remember whether the door opened by itself or whether I pushed it. What I remember is the sound, a pleased, dry whisper that could have been paper sliding across wood or a breath folding into a throat. Then, very gently, something laid itself across my shoulders like a coat I had been saving for winter. When I finally turned, the face that looked back wasn't mine.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.